just watched one of your interviews that came out last week, and you said something that one won't hear on mainstream media, at least not very often. You said that Netanyahu is just a reflection and a representation of Israeli society.
Yeah.
Now, the take that we usually get is, oh, we just need to get rid of Netanyahu and his
That's
extremist government, and Israel will become normal again. Could you elaborate a bit more on why that's not the case at all?
It's completely ridiculous. It's like saying the Russian war in Ukraine is Putin's war. Whether you like it or not, it's the whole entire Russian elite who regards a NATO state on its border as posing a threat to the security of Russia. It's not Putin's war. Can you show me somebody in the Russian leadership who opposes, who supports a NATO presence in Ukraine? Is there anybody? And the same thing, is there anybody? Israel is a parliamentary democracy, and tiny parties can have a big impact in tilting the coalition one way or the other. So, if you disagreed with Netanyahu, fundamentally disagreed with his policies of trying to make Gaza uninhabitable and also to restore Israel's deterrence capability against Hezbollah and Iran. If you really disagreed with those policies, you could form a party, get 3 seats in the Knesset, and have an impact. Do you see anybody forming a party on that platform? Yeah, there are differences over which you should prioritize now, making Gaza uninhabitable or bringing back the hostages. And after you bring back the hostages, then you continue on the path of making Gaza uninhabitable. There are differences of, they call it tactical differences. But there is no fundamental disagreement with Netanyahu, not only in the Israeli elite, but we have to be clear in the whole of Israeli society. Israeli society is completely lunatic. It is. The entire society is. If you look at the polls, only 4% of Israeli Jewish society believes Israel is using too much force in Gaza. 4%.
Oof.
And 40% think it's using too little force. That's a completely lunatic society. To try to impose or burden Prime Minister Netanyahu with all the sins of Israel is completely ridiculous. Netanyahu is Israel. He's an obnoxious Jewish supremacist. That's Israel. Obnoxious, I left out an important element, an obnoxious, narcissistic Jewish supremacist. Those are the 3 characteristics. That is Israel. Obnoxious beyond belief, narcissistic beyond calculation, and Jewish supremacist. That's Israel. And that's when they vote. When they see Netanyahu, they see themselves. That's why they vote for him.
On that note, Abby Martin, the American journalist, did a series of street interviews about 6 years ago, so well before October the 7th, where she was just walking around Jerusalem, kind of asking random Israelis what they thought about the Palestinians. Anybody can watch the videos on YouTube. And I have to say, it's pretty terrifying to hear what people were willing to say publicly and on camera. Their answers kind of ranged from, we've got to kick them out of Palestine immediately, to some people simply suggesting that Israel needs to carpet bomb the Palestinian territories. People didn't seem to find what they were saying problematic in the slightest. Again, we're not talking about post-October 7th here. It's just quite startling.
If you go back and read the literature by even very respected figures in American culture during the conquest of the West, they talked about the Indians as being savages. They all did. It was just the lingua franca of American society. Everybody referred to them as savages. They have to be wiped out, and so on and so forth. There's a decent book titled American Holocaust. And there's a very long chapter, a very dispiriting chapter on the attitudes of Americans towards the Euro Americans towards the Native Americans. If you read stuff like the Theodore Roosevelt, the American president, if you saw the way he talked about Native Americans, but it wasn't just Roosevelt, it was even people like Frank Baum, the author of The Wizard of Oz. It was everyone. Even to be perfectly candid about it, when I was growing up, I was an aficionado of cowboy and Indian movies. And I was always rooting for the cowboys to kill, to burn, not just to kill, to incinerate the savages. Totally, and that was when it was already over and the native population was already wiped out. But the residue, that feeling, still carried over in our culture. Actually, the first film to humanize Native Americans, the very first film, was, I think, 1975, something around there. It was called Little Big Men, and it starred Dustin Hoffman. It was the first film that presented the Native Americans as being actually human beings. So I don't find that totally shocking among the Israelis. That they consider they want to wipe out. I wanted to wipe out the Native Americans after they were already wiped out. What shocks me is the denial. Like yesterday, the New York Times had an article, or either yesterday or 2 days ago. The rioting at the prison where they're sodomizing prisoners. They called it a battle for Israel's soul. Come on, guys. That's like a battle for Germany's soul in an SS barracks. It's so completely divorced. They're still trying to project the images of an Israeli soul. Guys, that died a long time ago. When Israelis post videos of their euphoria and elation as they murder and torture Arabs on the social media, knowing full well they're not going to be ostracized, but quite the contrary, they're going to be celebrated, there's very little soul left there. So that's enough already. As the Spanish would say, bastante, enough already, bastante, enough with the soul. It's all for the New York Times, the Upper East Side Jewish billionaire supremacists, because that's the New York Times' basic, it's its reader base, the Upper East Side. So they want to still continue, they know the Jews in the Upper East Side, the billionaire Jewish supremacists. They love to hear about the Jewish soul, the Israeli soul.
Thank you so much for listening. If you liked what you heard, please consider subscribing to Smart Cookies on YouTube. What else is there? Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And if you really liked what you heard, feel free to become my Patreon. No, my patron on Patreon by going to Patreon and becoming my patron. It's really easy. Just type Smart Cookies Podcast in there. You should be able to find me. Last but not least, I have to thank the absolute legends that are my producers on this show, my existing patrons on Patreon: Aida, Mancian, Micha Medved, Medino, Gordon, Jurechuk, Lorenzo, Mila, Carmen, Taichi, Goran, and Veronica. Without you guys, this show wouldn't exist. So massive thanks. And yeah, see you in the next episode. Bye.